Welcome to Pod Save America. I'm Jon Favreau.
I'm Jon Lovett.
I'm Tommy Vietor.
Later in the pod, Tommy's interview with Nobel Peace Prize nominee Amanda Wen, who's behind a new effort to train young people to build social movements. We've got a lot of news to talk about first, from the resignation of Donald Trump's Secretary of Homeland Security and the Republican strategy to court Jewish voters, to Nancy Pelosi's strategy for keeping the House, and the ever-expanding 2020 field. Quick programming note, we'll be out on the road again this week, so our Thursday night show in Boston will be released... So our Thursday night show in Boston will be released as a pod on Friday, and our Sunday night show in New Hampshire will be released as next Monday's pod. Also a reminder that we dropped a bonus episode right before the weekend started. Tommy talked with Julian Castro about his presidential campaign on Friday right here in Los Angeles, and that entire interview is available now. You can also watch it at youtube.com/crookedmedia.
Wow.
Smash that subscribe button.
Wow, you can see it too.
You can listen to Tommy. You can watch Tommy.
Radio on TV.
It's great. All right, let's get to the news. During a meeting at the White House Sunday evening, Donald Trump asked for and then accepted the resignation of Homeland Security Secretary Kirstjen Nielsen. As the great Dara Lind wrote over at Vox, Nielsen has arguably been the most aggressive secretary in the department's short history in cracking down on immigration, with her legacy likely to be defined by the zero-tolerance prosecution policy of late spring and early summer 2018 that resulted in the separation of thousands of families at the U.S.-Mexico border. None of it appears to have been enough for Donald Trump. So Nielsen's resignation came shortly after Trump decided to withdraw his nominee to run ICE because Stephen Miller and others wanted to go in a, quote, tougher direction. Replacing Nielsen on an acting basis will be Kevin Mikulinin, who currently runs Customs and Border Protection. Trump's cabinet is now operating without permanent secretaries in charge of Homeland Security, Interior, and Defense.
And an acting chief of staff.
Which is
kind of the funniest one, because Trump could make Mulvaney permanent chief of staff today. He just doesn't do it because he wants him to feel small.
That's right.
I was actually wondering about that because it's the only one where, because he doesn't need to actually get confirmation, could just do it. I wonder if there are legal implications because he also is running OMB. He has Mulvaney running 3/4 of his government at any given moment.
I mean, you don't have a lot of choice these days in the Trump White House if you're looking for staffers. There's not that many people there. There's tumbleweeds in the hallways.
Mick or Jared.
It's
Mick, Jared, Ivanka, Stephen Miller,
and
then a bunch of random people who they just found.
Yeah, and Steve Bannon's
couple
empty Chinese food containers still lying around.
A couple Pepe memes.
Yeah.
So, guys, what do we know about why Trump fired Nielsen and what he's looking for in his next Homeland Security Secretary?
The reports are that she wasn't mean enough, John. The woman who oversaw the family separation policy that ripped kids away from their parents and separated them for months at a time, doing permanent damage to these children, was not mean enough for Donald Trump, according to background quotes in everything you read.
And it also seems like in recent weeks, Donald Trump has said, NBC's first reported this, that he wants to reinstate the family separation policy, and she resisted that. Now, it's not really up to Donald Trump to reinstate it or her to resist it. The reason it ended is because, one, he signed an executive order ending it, and two, the court stepped in and said he couldn't do it.
Right.
So it does seem like, I mean, we always focus on personalities, and we can talk about Nielsen all we want, but this is more of Donald Trump is facing an intractable policy problem that he cannot fix, in the legal problem that he cannot fix.
Yeah, getting rid of her, saying he's going to shut the border, saying he's going to reinstate family separation. It's what he's frustrated with is that his cabinet secretaries aren't magical. They're not magical cruelty beasts who can use cruelty to implement his vision. I mean, Dan tweeted about this over the weekend, but there was a tweet by one Donald J. Trump that captures his attitude about immigration, which is, I'm doing such a good job at the border. Everything at the border is really good. Also, it's a total catastrophe. It's an emergency. They're coming in droves, and we need to shut the border. And so he's trapped in this place where it's a signature issue. He's been president for, he's running for re-election. This is the signature issue of his presidency. It's not a success, right? The cruelty has not redounded to policy benefits that he was hoping would happen. And it's clear he doesn't know what to do. So he's firing people. He's yelling. He's calling for crazy things. He likes the attention on the issue, but he's clearly angry about what's been happening, and I don't think he has an answer.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is the I alone can fix it presidency the coming to fruition here, right? Like Trump promised that he could fix everything. He thinks he can fix everything. He thinks he can just fire people and get his way all the time. And he has never realized and never learned that to solve a problem as complicated as immigration, and look, there is an influx of asylum seekers at the border right now. And, any president, whether it's, and Donald Trump's policies helped fuel that influx of asylum seekers, but any president, Democrat or Republican, would be dealing with a lot of asylum seekers right now and have to figure out, well, what do I do about that? Most presidents would learn that you have to work within the bureaucracy. You have to work with Congress. Maybe you need some support from the other party. Maybe, and also maybe you need to have lawyers telling you what's the most legal,
you have to accept that it's complicated. It's hard.
Right.
And that there are reasons to not be so strident, because even if you have a view about how the immigration system could work, it's going to take time to get there. There are just complications to governing he's never shown any interest in, on top of being a racist who's pursuing nativist, nationalist, revanchist policies in order to rile up his base.
It's also clear that he just doesn't understand immigration policy
fundamentally
in any way, shape, or form, despite it being the thing that he focuses on the most. Like, he referred to the Flores court settlement, which bars the federal government from detaining minors for more than 20 days, and blamed it on Judge Flores, whoever you may be, end quote. No, it was a little girl with the last name Flores that led to this agreement, I believe in the 80s. And the agreement
years
came
ago.
to be in like 97. He doesn't seem to understand, or at least he doesn't care, that building a wall doesn't stop people from seeking asylum. And in fact, so like, what do we do about it? We're stuck in this place where he says and does the same things over and over and over again in immigration policy, and he just gets increasingly craven sounding, talking about doing away with asylum entirely, talking about closing down the border to Mexico, talking about eliminating all aid for Latin American or Central American countries. And the press covers it because it's crazy and new and like completely counterproductive. But I don't know what else to do. We're stuck in this cycle.
And it is alarming because it seems like even since the midterms, he has sort of attacked the rule of law even more than he has. Or, he's, as you said many times, Lovett, he's the raptor testing the fence here. Mm-hmm. And what he's looking for is another Homeland Security secretary and other personnel who will help him essentially break the law.
Yeah.
because he's now stuck. And he also said the other day, what we need to do is get rid of the judges.
It's just like it's authoritarian riffing. Like, he hasn't thought very deeply. He has no discipline, right? There's no plan here. I mean, I think part of the reason why it's important that the media does cover what he says about immigration is it's actually one of the few places where he's followed through on some of his more outlandish promises, right? The zero tolerance policy resulting in family separation, that began as this kind of frenetic, off-the-cuff riffing, and then all of a sudden it's policy.
But usually he's had to step back from those because of the courts.
Including this one.
I don't blame them for covering him when he says all these outlandish things, but it does reinforce this notion that there is a massive, unprecedented crisis at the border, which just simply isn't true. There's a huge problem at the border. There's a growing number of people coming up from Central America and seeking asylum, and the system is being stressed to the point of breaking. But he's doing things to make that situation worse, not better.
I think there is legitimately a humanitarian crisis at the border
Absolutely.
right now. Because, I think we've had triple the number of asylum seekers this month that we had last month.
And they've been metering them, so they're not hearing their cases, so they're all stuck in camps in Mexico.
Well, that's the issue. So it's a humanitarian crisis. It is not a national security crisis, which is how the administration is talking about it. These are not people who are criminals. These are not people who are coming to our country and causing crime. These are mostly women and children and families who are seeking asylum. And what has happened is there is this huge backlog of cases right now while they're seeking asylum about whether their asylum application will be processed. We don't have enough judges. There's a backlog of cases. And Trump, this whole time, is focusing on fucking building a wall, which will do nothing about this. He has, someone said, he has only repaired some miles of fencing since coming to office. He has built 0 miles of new fencing.
Well, this is the thing that's so strange, right? I imagine, this is partly why he's sort of raging about this, is that he's trapped here because on the one hand, he does, I think correctly, see this as one of the few things he can successfully talk about with his base. And on the other hand, he's not a candidate, he's the president, right? So he has a record here. So I think a lot of this venting at Nielsen, venting at the fact that these people weren't tough enough, is looking for someone to be able to run against, basically, to say, like, this is what has prevented me from actually implementing my vision. And I think it comes back to, I think it's worth looking at what Nielsen represents, because I think it's important that she's leaving, and it's important that we're having this conversation about her legacy, because she is what happens when you try to, like, put a layer of seriousness, a layer of adulthood, like icing on this Trump cake of sort of bigotry and chaos and frenetic, you know.
You think she's the icing?
I think she's the, I think icing is the wrong word. I mean that she's like, she's
pretty horrible.
Of course she's horrible. What I'm saying is she tried to do what Trump wanted to do while looking like a traditional, serious cabinet secretary.
I don't agree with that. She fucking went to the press briefing room and lied like crazy. Like, that's not serious. That's just being a polished looking liar.
But that's what I mean. She is a polished representative of Trumpism. That's what she's trying to do.
But presenting well is a very different thing, in my opinion, than like acting like an adult in the room and trying to calm his worst instincts, which she never ever did.
Well, that's what they're claiming, right? That's what they claim behind the scenes.
That's what they want to spin it.
I mean, we've had so many conversations about personnel in this White House, right? And I think what we've learned is some of these people resist him for a time, most don't. Some people resist him sometimes and then end up giving in to him anyway, right?
But that's what I mean.
Really, the personalities in this administration, whether it's Gary... What the fuck was his name?
Cohn?
Gary Cohn.
Wow.
Whether it was a Gary Cohn or a John Kelly or a Kirstjen Nielsen or a Stephen Miller, like, whether they're with him all the time, with him sometimes, not with him sometimes, he gets his way in the end because he's bulldozing people left and right.
He's the president.
But that's the
bulldozing
point.
Norms. He's trying to break the law. He's doing all the shit. You know?
That's the point. She thought she could come in and be respectable, you know, be a serious Republican inside the Trump administration. It turns out that's impossible. You become the representative of what requires lies in order to execute, and you leave tarnished by Trump and having succeeded in and having failed to do anything to mitigate his worst impulses.
I think what we have to worry about now is, so McAleenan reportedly has said that when they're talking about bringing back family separation, that he might present families with a binary option, which is either you can be separated from your children or you can all go into detention together indefinitely. And they're contemplating this policy.
That's illegal
right,
per the Flores agreement, which says you cannot hold kids for longer than 20 days. So I guess we're reaching another breaking point where we're going to have to decide, maybe Republicans in the Senate will have to decide if we're going to just allow the Trump administration to brazenly break the law. Maybe a court will jump in and stop them from doing this. But we saw this with the Magnitsky sanctions about Jamal Khashoggi. They were required under law to present their findings to Congress, and they said, nope, not going to do it, and no one said anything.
And again, we should remember that back when Republicans controlled the House and the Senate, Donald Trump had a chance to pass some kind of immigration policy where he got more border security, maybe even some money for his wall.
Yep. A lot of money for his wall.
A lot of money for his wall, right? Help DACA
fix.
recipients and Dreamers. And even, ended family migration policy.
5 times the amount of money for what he shut the government down over for border security, right? There was $25 billion was on the table.
Right.
He shut the government down over $5 billion. He's turned down $25 billion.
Yeah. From whether you're looking at it from the right or the left, his immigration policy has been a failure, an abject failure.
I mean, you look at what's happening right now, right? All of this, you step back and like all this asylum conversation, shutting down the border, the judges trying to blame, trying to foment in front of a fucking group of American Jews that the country's full, saying that the asylum seekers are faking, and saying it's all about trying to ferret out the share of asylum seekers who might not deserve asylum. That is the primary focus of the Donald Trump administration at the border. Finding the group of asylum seekers.
Trying to convince everyone that small group that doesn't deserve asylum is everyone.
Is everyone.
That's what he's trying to say.
Of course it's everyone. But even just the idea that, like, even if you accept that a share of the asylum seekers don't deserve asylum, this is not a crisis. This is not a national security crisis. It's not a national security threat. It's not worthy of an endless debate over and over and over again. It's not the most important issue facing the country. It's not the most important issue at the border.
But it's going to be the issue in the fucking 2020 election because he's going to make it the issue every day.
Yeah.
So as you mentioned, Lovett, we did hear some of the president's xenophobic rage over immigration during a speech to the Republican Jewish Coalition in Las Vegas on Saturday, where he said that our current asylum system is a, quote, scam, and that families and children seeking asylum should turn back because the United States is full. First of all, Is the Republican Jewish coalition not an odd place to declare that the United States will no longer provide refuge to groups of people fleeing violence and persecution?
You'd like to think it wouldn't be. You'd like to think it wouldn't be. But I thought the thing that was most chilling is the fact that him saying America's full, that they're faking it, works in front of this audience now. And it's like, come on, people, shame on you.
Yeah, I mean, Trump telling a group of Jewish voters that America's full to a room that included an audience with Holocaust survivors in it is one of the most historically ignorant, insulting things you could ever imagine him saying to that audience. But he did.
I can't imagine the Holocaust survivors in that audience hearing that, especially with America's history of there was a time when we turned back Holocaust survivors.
Entire boats full of individuals who later died in concentration camps. I mean, we drastically restricted immigration quotas and enforcement and made it almost impossible to immigrate to the United States in the 30s and 40s, or 20s, 30s.
So Trump also made an appeal to Jewish Republicans in his speech by saying that the Democrats are pushing an extreme anti-Semitic agenda, quote, and attacking Representative Ilhan Omar just a few days after federal agents arrested a Trump supporter who threatened to, quote, put a bullet in her head. And to show the audience what a good friend he is to American Jews, Trump referred to Benjamin Netanyahu as, quote, your prime minister, and said the Democrats could, quote, leave Israel out there all by yourselves. In response, the Anti-Defamation League and the American Jewish Committee both criticized the president's statement for, quote, feeding bigotry and, quote, leading people to believe that Jews aren't loyal Americans. Guys, do you think all the Republicans and D.C. pundits who accused Ilhan Omar of feeding the dual loyalty trope are busy writing their takes about Trump today? Think those op-eds are getting printed?
It's so frustrating. Look, he has done some of the most, he's bought into anti-Semitic tropes in front of Jewish audiences again and again and again. That is what he does. He thinks it's charming. And if you listen to the way the crowd reacts, sometimes the crowd finds it charming too. And it's very frustrating because it's I think the biggest reminder of it is that this is a bad faith attack on Democrats, obviously. And it's just a reminder that he can go in front of these crowds and use these tropes himself,
while attacking Democrats for being anti-Semitic in the next breath,
while right-wing anti-Semitism is on the rise.
I mean, you couldn't write down a more clear-cut example of accusing someone of dual loyalty than telling them your prime minister. So it's right. But in 2015, he told the same group, "You're not going to support me, even though you know I'm the best thing that could ever happen to Israel, because I don't want your money." You don't want to give me money. You want to control your own politician. He said that to them. That is the most anti-Semitic thing I've ever heard. And the reason that doesn't get replayed on Fox News and Breitbart and Loops is because Trump's a Republican and because Ilhan Omar is an African-American Muslim who wears a hijab. That is the reason they play her shit over and over and over again, her comments. Now, there are reasonable people who could hear those comments and think, that's offensive, that's unfair, I don't like that. I completely respect them for feeling that way. And certainly, she received near universal condemnation. But what Trump does and says is worse. And we're not even talking about all the literal Nazis who love him.
Barely a blip hit these comments.
And it's funny because it's Trump does it like, oh, we're all in on the joke.
Yeah,
you're
negotiate, I negotiate.
You're rich Jews. Jews, you love your money. But it's not a joke to a lot of people who are watching it. And Donald Trump does not only practice this anti-Semitic. Donald Trump doesn't just engage in this kind of anti-Semitic rhetoric in front of Jews. He has done it before. He's famously done it in private. It's been reported on many times. Mm-hmm. You go back, look, it's a small thing. But when Jon Stewart made fun of Donald Trump, Donald Trump referred to him as John Leibowitz over and over again. Why? Because it was his Jewish name. And he would put Stewart in question marks, and he would call him, I don't even remember them off the top of my head, but he would use all kinds of anti-Semitic words about Jon Stewart. It is his nature. It's what he's using to appeal to people. And it is shameful for Jewish people to smile and smirk at this kind of fucking rhetoric that America's full, that you're rich Jews who just try to buy your politicians because you think that he's in on the joke. There's a lot of people who aren't.
It's also important to understand that these are not just bad faith attacks coming from Donald Trump. This isn't just like Trump spouting off. The Republican Jewish Coalition and Sheldon Adelson are reportedly planning a $10 million campaign in 2020 to convince Jewish Americans who traditionally vote overwhelmingly Democratic to vote for Donald Trump, the man who just called the Prime Minister of Israel their leader.
And I don't think it's directed. I think it's going to be directed at Jewish Americans, but I think it's particularly directed at older Jewish Americans.
Sure.
And if my personal experience in my family, what I hear, I think it's working.
I mean, so
For a certain subset of older Jews, I think it's working.
yeah, I think. Look, I don't disagree. I mean, there's $10 million to reach 2% of the U.S. population, but obviously, if you're trying to swing a couple thousand voters in Florida or Pennsylvania, this matters a lot. That said, like exit polling data since like the 90s has shown that the Jewish voters pretty overwhelmingly go to Democrats. But also, J Street has done a bunch of polling because hawkish Republicans always claim that the Jewish vote could be swung by just talking about Israel, but in fact, when they ask, J Street's pollster asked American Jews, like, what are your top 2 voting issues? They usually say the economy, healthcare, terrorism, gun violence. About 10% or less in these polls say Israel. Also, 80% of American Jews support a 2-state solution. So it may be the case that this is a threshold issue for a lot of older Jewish voters, where they think if the Democrat is insufficiently pro-Israel, they then can look to the Republican Party, and that's probably the argument they're trying to make. But just stepping back a bit, the unflinching Republican support for everything Israel does has nothing to do with Jewish voters. It has everything to do with evangelical voters,
Yes,
who the furthest right wing of which think that Israel needs to be fully controlled to have the rapture come, and that all the Jews will later be converted to Christianity, or they'll go to hell. Like, they're talking to John Hagee and Jerry Falwell Jr. and those crazy creeps far more than they're actually talking to Jewish voters, I believe.
Yeah, I still want to find the Democratic Jewish voters who are Democratic in every way, but because of Trump's position on Israel are now moving over, as opposed to older Jewish voters who were already sort of Trumpified and then thus are more willing to listen to this message. I don't know the answer, but
I don't think we know either. But I do think it's this kind of thing where it's sowing this little bit of doubt in the minds of a subset of American Jews. Say like, hey, you can't trust these Democrats. Maybe you'll stay home. Maybe you'll vote for Trump. Maybe it'll just become a bigger issue for you. But it's just there to kind of just stoke that little bit of fear. Same. That's what the Omar stuff too is. It just leaves a little bit of a mark.
I totally agree. I mean, one of my neighbors is a Holocaust survivor, and I went over to her house once. She's incredibly old, but Fox News is on all day, every day, blaring, and she's probably seeing story after story about Ilhan Omar. And also, yes, it works.
And also, just one more thing, and we'll get to it, but it's also about equating supporting Israel with supporting right-wing American politics and supporting right-wing Israel politics, right? That's like the biggest, that's the most important long-term project that they've been engaged in.
Well, speaking of that, just days before the elections coming up in Israel this week, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said in an interview that he'd start annexing settlements in the West Bank if he's reelected. Netanyahu, who's the subject of multiple investigations, is fighting for his political life. Tommy, why is he saying this, and how bad is it?
So just a little context. So, Bibi called early elections because he thought it would prevent the attorney general in Israel, who he handpicked, who is a total right-winger as well, from bringing forward indictments about him starting the process of indicting him on corruption charges. That did not work. So now he's cut.
How did we get that William Barr?
Well, their legal system takes even longer than ours, so it's frustrating. So basically, this election is on Tuesday, and Bibi it's not just that the Likud would win, his party would win outright, like the Democrat or Republican Party wins outright. There's like 40 different parties running, and they each, to get a seat in the Knesset, you need to reach 3.25% because it's a proportional system. So what he's trying to do is get support from the furthest right wing political parties and to get out Likud members by doing these drastic last-minute things. In the 2016 election, the day before the election day or the day of the election day, he released a wildly racist video that said Arab voters were going to the polls in droves because they wanted to take him out, and that was how he inched over the line.
And he is attacking get-out-the-vote efforts among non-Jews. And so this is very similar. I mean, it's actually in a lot of ways equivalent to Donald Trump's sort of caravan stuff right before the election.
Oh, yeah,
right?
yeah. Same exact thing.
Netanyahu's been in power for a decade. Days before the election, he announces a new right-wing policy on the West Bank. First of all, why wouldn't people see through that? But also, the only reason Netanyahu faces a threat right now is that there's been a new coalition formed in the center of Israel. But everyone kind of recognizes that Israel has moved to the right. Why? What explains this power that he has?
He's been a survivor for a long time. He's had personal corruption charges against him since the very beginning. He's running against a guy named Benny Gantz and a coalition of former Israeli generals who I think, frankly, if they win, we will not be close to happy with their politics either. So, with regard to the need to annex West Bank settlements, basically every member of the Likud policy has already come out in support of this policy. It's just that no prime minister ever has and Netanyahu ever has. So,
do you think it's a popular policy with the Israeli people?
I think it's growing more popular, and it's certainly probably very popular in the Likud party, which is his, the conservative party and parties to the right. So what he's trying to do, because of their weird system, is he needs to forge coalitions with these super far right-wing policies, including one that was so racist that they were compared to Nazis, literally, and to get out all his people. Because you can have a scenario where a more moderate party wins more votes than the Likud party, but if they can't form a coalition to form a government, then it falls back to whoever else can pull it off. So that's what his play is here. Now, the problem with this policy is most people view it as a nail in the coffin of a two-state solution.
Yeah.
These are
it's an apartheid state if they do that.
There's always been an assumption that in a negotiated two-state solution, there are Israeli settlements that are right along the border that would be swapped in terms of territorial swaps so that they would remain part of Israel. What's happened is the settlement construction has gotten so far into Israel that to carve out all of those settlements
into the West Bank.
What's happened is the settlement construction has gotten so far into the West Bank that to carve out all of those areas and bring them into Israel, you basically would make it so you just have these little islands of territory that become the West Bank. There's no contiguous state.
And there's lots of little dotted. There's lots of little.
Yeah,
Seems like that was by design, huh?
Well, yeah. Yeah. And so Israel now faces this existential choice where they can continue to go for a two-state solution, or they can essentially annex the West Bank and have a one-state solution. But then, you will then incorporate 2.8 million Palestinians into Israel. And the question becomes, is this now a democratic state? Do they have the right to vote? And if they don't, it's no longer a democratic state.
And presumably one of the obstacles to a prime minister annexing the West Bank was that they'd face international rebuke, including from the United States, but Donald Trump won't do that.
That's exactly right. Every other, Bibi may have wanted to do this for a very long time. Obama had to force him to say he supported a two-state solution back in 2009. They know that Trump will not say a damn word because they handed over the Golan Heights and they moved the Jerusalem embassy, which, in fairness to Trump, every other president has promised to do and not done. But
as part of
Trump will never question this. Trump will never question this.
All right, let's talk about the Democrats. In a new, wide-ranging interview with the Washington Post, Speaker Nancy Pelosi predicted that her party will hold on to the House in 2020, saying that she's, quote, going to have our races won by this November.
She's such a boss.
I just love that's a year early, Nancy.
Then she's got the next year to just sort of chill out.
Yeah, take up meditation.
Kick back. Paul Kane of the Post wrote that Pelosi rejected the idea that today's Democrats are further to the left than a decade ago. She said it was just a few high-profile people in Congress and then a few presidentials, and has instead charted a course of again appealing to moderate suburbanites and some rural voters frustrated by Trump's reality TV-style presidency. She doesn't want to focus on impeaching Trump or on far-fetched legislation that has no hope of passing in divided government. This is all from Kane. She promises not to repeat the mistakes leading up to 2010, saying, quote, you cannot let your opponents mischaracterize what you're about. So what was missing from that election was a strong messaging piece, and that's what we had in this last election in 2018. What do we think about Pelosi's strategy here?
I don't particularly understand the 2010 point, right? Because the other thing
I don't think it was a messaging problem in 2010.
I think even if there is a messaging problem, there's a big difference between running to take power and running to keep power.
Especially, by the way, we should just lay out the context. Running to keep power after you have passed a massive government program, the Affordable Care Act, and the economy has not even started recovering from the worst recession since the Great Depression.
And we're in this sort
that was 2010.
And we're in this this word I constantly regret using, this liminal space between Obamacare passing.
Liminal space.
Yeah, between Obamacare passing and being vilified and Obamacare actually becoming something that's a part of people's lives, right?
Which happened like yesterday.
Yeah, man, that took a long time.
People started liking it right before 2018.
Yeah. We stood up geocities.healthcare.gov, and that didn't work. So it was
people love it.
Now they can't get enough of it.
Yeah, they want more. But yeah, I mean, what do we? Sorry, what else do we think about her strategy there? Saying, it's moderate suburbanites, rural voters. She's worried about them.
I mean, it seems like she's trying to give cover to a lot of moderate Democrats who won in 2018 in districts where impeachment might not be popular, in districts where some of the more progressive legislation that we've all talked about ad nauseum might not be as popular. She's trying to take some slings and arrows for them in advance of them having to talk about it.
Yeah, I mean, one thing we have to understand is that Nancy Pelosi's job is different from any of these Democratic presidential candidates. They're trying to put together a coalition, a national coalition that adds up to 270 electoral votes. In doing so, we have often said that you need a candidate who can rally and inspire the base of the party, including people who haven't felt like they wanted to vote before, non-voters, and still appeal to sort of these middle-of-the-road independent swing voters, whatever you want to call them. And that's what we need in the presidential level. On the House level, there are a lot of districts where there's not a lot of base voters.
Yeah.
And there's not a lot of trying to get, and that is, and we have to remember and recognize that in 2018, we did not win the House because there was this sort of liberal surge among the base. We won the House because in a lot of these districts, there were a lot of Republican voters who decided to vote Democrat for the first time, and independent voters. And that's what's on Nancy Pelosi's mind. And that is a different task than what the presidential candidates have to do.
I also just think, we've talked about this before too. There are no really grand conclusions you can draw from 2018 in the sense of saying this is the way you need to run to win a House seat, right? There were California districts that we won, even with very liberal candidates, but still won by pulling in independents and pulling in Republicans. There are more liberal districts where people like AOC could mount a campaign that not only helps them win the district, but kind of creates a new benchmark for how far the left can be inside the Democratic Party, and that has value. So, there are going to be places where Democrats can run on Medicare for all, can call for impeachment, can put a marker down for the Green New Deal, and then there are going to be districts where people have to run a more moderate race. That's the game. That's okay.
Right.
That's all. I mean,
and we should say it's not to say that if you are in one of these purple reddish districts, you have to run some moderate centrist campaign. We've made this point a million times, but Katie Porter won a suburban district out here that was very Republican. She's for Medicare for all. She's a protege of Elizabeth Warren, still won that race. But it's not like there's a lot of Democrats who were in some of these reddish purple districts who won their seats by talking about abolishing ICE.
Yeah. I mean, there's also just a lot of jockeying going on. You see it every day on Twitter to define who is a progressive, what progressivism is. A lot of it is involved discussion about Medicare for all or a buy-in plan or legislation Pelosi put forward to shore up Obamacare in the interim, right? That's a conversation that's happened a lot. It was interesting talking to Julian Castro because he has an immigration policy that is way to the left of anyone else, and that's not seen as the same sort of litmus test. So It's a question of how will he start to define his policy as the litmus test for what it means to be progressive, or will he at all? Because that's how you're going to get to the left of some of these people in this campaign.
It's also worth remembering too, I can understand being frustrated. There's this balance that someone like Nancy Pelosi has to strike, right? Because on the one hand, she's setting the agenda, right? Mm-hmm. She's going to decide what it does mean to be progressive in a way that's practical, right? She is going to help set that boundary. At the same time, she's also going to share this kind of what does amount to kind of a form of punditry and saying, here's what I believe some candidates have to do, here's what I believe other candidates have to do. But the thing to remember is the right bound of the let me just say this again. What we have seen repeatedly is that Nancy Pelosi is not going to be the obstacle to how far left Democratic politics can go. The House version of Obamacare was further to the left than the Senate version of Obamacare. Anything we end up passing, if we are so lucky as to take the Senate, the bound will be determined by the debates that take place inside of the Senate. Her job is to just retain. Her job is just to retain the House, try to build that majority, right?
Well, yeah, and it's a question of, let's fight about what version of healthcare legislation we pass once we actually have the power to pass it.
Yeah.
As opposed to fighting about it now, because you can vote for Medicare for all. You can vote for Bernie Sanders' bill and, Representative Jayapal's bill in the House right now on single payer, or you could vote for Nancy Pelosi's ACA legislation that would shore up the ACA. either of those votes right now, they ain't going anywhere after they leave the House.
Right. But and notably, Congresswoman Jayapal supports Pelosi's bill to shore up ACA.
That's right.
Now, the one exception, I think, to what Lovett was saying is that Pelosi is trying to supports efforts by the DCCC to prevent people from helping out primary challengers to the Democratic Party. So to the extent she is protecting incumbents, I guess you could argue that prevents the party from moving to the left. But it's also completely understandable from her point of view to not want to spend money on primaries. It's the kind of thing McConnell would do. We would all, sort of grudgingly admire how cynical and awful he is. Now, I personally think if you want to primary someone in a safe district, go for it. That's great. But it's a notable exception.
That's where I disagreed with her in this interview, is her decision to support the DCCC's blacklist. So, like you said, the DCCC is basically saying we will blacklist any firm, any consulting firm that works for anyone who's mounting a primary challenge to a sitting House Democrat. And look, I think primaries are healthy for this party. Now, I think, it's interesting. Ro Khanna, who's one of the more liberal members of the House, he seems to have floated a compromise. And he said, well, why don't we say that if you're mounting a primary challenge to someone in a safe blue seat, we won't blacklist your consulting firm and you should be able to do whatever you want, mount that primary challenge. But you shouldn't mount a primary challenge to someone who's sitting in a reddish purple seat that could flip. And I think that's a pretty sensible compromise. But look, we have to understand that primary challenges within the Democratic Party, primary challenges within the Democratic Party and House challenges have happened for such a long time, right? Barack Obama ran against Bobby Rush for his first congressional race. That's how Beto O'Rourke won his seat, mounted a primary challenge, right? This has happened for a long, long time now.
I also don't think this is going to dissuade anyone from running. It is going to create a debate we're having right now that basically says that a portion of the party's opinion isn't wanted or isn't welcome. It's also going to mean that there's firms that are going to then become primary. I don't even know how this shakes out, but you end up in a situation where you're literally dividing the party between people who work for incumbents and people who work for primary challengers. And there's a lot of places where there should be primary challengers because these are very blue districts with members that have been there for a long time who don't represent the best interests of their district and are far to the right of where the Democratic mainstream has become.
Or if you think that they do represent the district, then they make that case to voters, and whoever wins wins.
Right? Why do you put your thumb on the scales like that?
They're trying to mount a primary challenge to Richard Neal in Massachusetts, because he won't hold a hearing on Medicare for All in the Ways and Means Committee. Now they're going to hold a hearing for Medicare for All in the House. Nancy Pelosi's already promised that. He doesn't want to do so in his committee. He's also the guy that's now going after Trump's tax returns. You could make an argument that he's pretty liberal, but if you say that he's not liberal enough, run the primary challenge. If he's liberal enough, he wins the seat. If not, he doesn't. That's how it goes.
I also think there might just be a practical problem here for the DCCC. If you have a pollster who's working on 10 races for you and they're on calls with your paid media team, your research team, your comms team all the time, then that person is also working on a primary challenger against some of your incumbents, it just creates some weird challenges that they're probably getting ahead of.
You can have an inspector general, running around, crunching the numbers. It all feels like it feels like a lot of work to prevent someone from doing some polling and running some ads. Also, kind of elevates the role that consultants play. It's just the whole thing is too much,
which is already way too elevated in people's minds,
right?
Because of all these stories, right? It's actually not as big of a deal.
You're going to deny.
The consultants don't make the fucking race either way. They just don't.
You're going to take away the lifeblood of these campaigns.
Everyone thinks you hire high-priced consultants and they win your campaign for you. It's just not what happens. You need a good candidate and a good message. That's the fundamentals.
The consultant come out there and be like, remember, middle class.
Yeah, no shit.
That'll be $5 grand.
Yeah, that probably actually happens. Yeah.
So, speaking of all this, our old boss, Barack Obama, was talking to young leaders in Berlin over the weekend, and he said that he worries that sometimes progressives create a circular firing squad because our allies stray from purity on the issues. Is he right to worry?
I think is he on Twitter? Does he have a secret Twitter account?
Which is good for him. I think he just probably hears the fights.
He might be right. It might be totally fine that there is a constant roiling conversation about Democratic policy ideas that consumes the media narrative the way the fucking Trump show did in 2016. I have no idea. I do think, look, it drives me crazy personally when I see people running down, for example, the Affordable Care Act, because I think it's the height of privilege to say that Medicare expansion or 20 million people getting health insurance is not somehow significant for those individuals, right? So like, you might think I'm wrong, and that's just fine, but I think it's an absurd argument.
Yeah, my view on this has always been we should absolutely have fierce policy debates over the direction of the party, and everyone should be free to participate in those debates. But what I start worrying about is challenging each other's motivations, right? When you pick a specific policy, saying that you're a corporate shill or you're doing this for this reason or that reason, like that's when it starts to get bad, because that's when we start telling each other that this Democrat is not worthy because they're like a little bit to the right on this policy or that policy. That's a problem. It's completely fine to say, my candidate supports this policy, the other candidate supports this policy. I don't think it goes far enough, and so that's why I'm for my. Great, then fight that out.
Yeah, it's also, I think part of it
gets
too.
Much nastier than that on Twitter.
Yeah, I mean, I think part of it is that so much of our debate around candidates, around politics, around ideology is about what we'll do when we get power.
Yeah.
That it ends up being an argument about who's really going to do what they say they're going to do, who can you really count on, who's really progressive, when the evidence, the record you're going on is mostly words, mostly proposals, mostly how strongly they talk about certain issues. And I think then when debates, I guess it's like circling fire squads. It's like, well, what's in the chamber? Like what are we firing at each other? And it's like when a debate boils down to, see, this is why you can't trust this person. See, this is why you shouldn't ever listen to this person. See, this is why you should disabuse yourself of this entire wing of the party. I think that is when you have crossed a line.
Yeah. Also, I'm totally fine with elections being really contentious. And I think vetting candidates is a good thing. You should dig into their record. We should do it now before that person wins, and it happens in the general election.
Yeah.
Right? Like that should be our operating assumption. I don't care if it's nasty and contentious. I just think it's an argument that you should think about whether the way you attack someone's motives or criticize them personally might turn someone off from your candidate permanently.
Yeah,
that's a thing that people should consider.
And I'll say I saw people pointing out that Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton ran quite a contentious race against each other in 2008, maybe more contentious than the Bernie-Hillary race in 2016. And I think there's a lot of evidence for that. But you know what? All of us on both campaigns, the Obama campaign and the Clinton campaign, will look back at some of those debates and some of those attacks, and we're not super proud of all of it. Like that debate where she's saying you're slumlord Rezko and Obama's saying you sat on the corporate board of Walmart. Like, I don't think that was a great moment for either of them. And I don't think that was very constructive, and I don't think that helped either of them and helped the party at all.
Well, part of the problem of those debates at the time, what they'd been debating for such a long time, their policy differences were minimal.
Yeah, it was just the mandate.
The healthcare mandate where
and some vote on Iran, I think.
Well, there was the whole Iraq war thing.
Oh, that was the big one.
But of course, by then these fights had been litigated so much, and mostly what they'd been proposing to do as president aligned so much that they were left with like so little to actually yell at each other about, and they're so frustrated.
Iraq was the big one, and then Iraq was in the past, so then it was like going forward, it was too similar, the two.
Well, that was the IRGC designation, which Trump did today.
I was just thinking
Wonderful.
about that. All right, let's talk about 2020. Over the last few days, I think something like 40 additional Democrats announced they're running for president. Ohio Congressman Tim Ryan announced on Thursday the 45-year-old Ryan, who's been in Congress since 2003, is perhaps best known for running unsuccessfully against Nancy Pelosi for minority leader back in 2016. He pitched himself on The View as, quote, a progressive who knows how to talk to working class people and get elected in working class districts. California Congressman Eric Swalwell is announcing his bid on Colbert tonight, Monday night, and he'll be hosting a town hall this week on gun safety with our friend Cameron Kasky, one of the survivors of the shooting last year in Parkland, Florida, because he wants to focus his campaign on gun violence. Colorado Senator Michael Bennet said last week that despite a recent prostate cancer diagnosis, he's committed to running for president once he's healthy. Others still considering a run include former Virginia Governor Terry McAuliffe, New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio, Montana Governor Steve Bullock, and Stacey Abrams. So outside of Stacey Abrams, who I'm going to put aside because she is fantastic and has a national profile, I've seen a lot of complaining and mocking on Twitter about all of these prospective candidacies. Let's take the other side, just for shits and giggles here. What's the argument for running if you're one of these candidates? What are they seeing when they look at the political environment and the current field that's telling them, I should do this?
It's hard. I don't know. I honestly don't know. I mean, look, Eric Swalwell is an easier example. It seems like he wants to run a campaign that's primarily focused on stopping gun violence.
Right.
That is admirable. That's
sort of like the Jay Inslee.
That's an interesting approach. But I also think it's an open question for me if that approach, where you say I'm the climate change candidate like Jay Inslee did, is the best way to elevate that issue. I would argue that AOC did a hell of a lot more to elevate the issue of climate change or the people who protested Dianne Feinstein's office than Jay Inslee has so far. Now, it's early. Maybe that will change, but like that's my honest take on it. So maybe, I don't know, maybe they're going to bring something to this race that we can't see yet, and so we should by no means rule them out. It's just when you enter this late, it's hard to fundraise, it's hard to get staff, it's hard to meet the thresholds to get into debates. I'm not sure I get the strategy.
I don't know. So if you think about running on an issue, there's two reasons to run on the issue. One is because you want to make the issue central to politics, or two, you want to use the issue as a launching pad for your own legitimate, full-throated presidential race. I don't know in the case of Swalwell or Inslee what the goal is, but in either case, you look at this field right now, you see Beto O'Rourke, who is no longer in Congress, who has raised millions of dollars. You see Mayor Pete Buttigieg, who turned and this is not a criticism of him at all, who turned a few key moments on television where he was thoughtful and interesting and new into enough of a base of support to get on the debate stage. You look at that and you say, all right, I have one persuasive, powerful moment about the climate. I have one persuasive, powerful moment about gun control in a CNN town hall. Maybe I can get to 65,000 donors. Maybe I get on the debate stage, and the debate stage is a chance to reach the people that you can't reach when you don't have a national profile. And so maybe a lot of people are saying the debate stage is the threshold. If I make it, I make a shot at it. If I don't, I'm out.
I think that's exactly right. Yeah. I have a few thoughts on this. I mean, I think this all might have started with Barack Obama winning the presidency. Right? He was a state senator who was then a senator for a year and then became president of the United States. It accelerated in a huge fucking way with Donald Trump winning the presidency because he was just we know this whole story. We don't have to repeat it again, but Donald Trump is president now. Yeah. So there's that. Right?
Thank you for skipping.
Yeah, I was gonna go
previously on America.
Yeah, we know how that ended. So you see that, and then you think, okay, well, anyone can really do this now, right? If Donald Trump's president, anyone can do this now. And then you think the way that the media has changed, right? Where you can get all this national attention for a couple viral moments, right? And the way that raising money in the Democratic Party has changed. You used to have to know a bunch of rich donors and sit with them and suck up to them and then get money that way. Now you can raise a ton of money online. And so they look at all this kind of stuff. And I think you're right, especially, it started with Beto in this race, but especially Buttigieg, right? Where these people are congressmen, or in Bill de Blasio's case, the largest city in the country.
Yeah.
And they're saying, he is a mayor of a pretty small college town and has held no other elected office. And this guy has raised $7 million and is now this sort of national candidate who's really has a chance in the race.
And who benefits from running even if he doesn't become the nominee.
Right. That's the more cynical version of this, which is you run for office to get a cabinet appointment, or worse, you run to get a book deal. Or if you're Herman Cain, you get a book deal and you get named to the Fed later, right? Just because you run for president and you raise your profile and you get speaking fees. And I'll tell you. Now, I'm not making that accusation about the Democrats, but certainly that was the case for most of the Republicans who ran for president.
For sure.
They did it to make money down the road.
I'm not making these accusation either. I really hope that's not true because I do not have I do not respect as much, I will just say, people who are running who thinking I'm not going to win, but I'm just running because I want to raise my profile. And look, I think Pete Buttigieg is not running because he wants to raise his profile. I think he really wants to do this, But I think if you're running for president, if you do this, you really have to think that there is a path for you and that you want to run. And maybe all these people do. And I think the reason they do is for all these reasons made up. They're all I need is a couple big moments, where I take off. And then if I can just get to that debate stage and show people, what I am and what my message is and what my story is, then there I go. And they're looking at the field too, by the way, and they're saying we have two front runners, Joe Biden and Bernie Sanders, one in the race, one not in the race yet. And they're not traditionally super strong front runners like Hillary was in 2015, 2016. You know, they're both polling at like between 25 and 30%. You know, Biden's support has ticked down a little bit. Bernie's has stayed solid. But they're not so strong, and no one else. And then after that, you've got Kamala, Warren, Beto, and now Buttigieg all sort of in the mix at around 8 to 10%, and then a whole bunch of other. You're looking at that field, and you're like, nothing is scaring me away.
Right. And I also they're human beings, and I just think we don't know how loud the applause was in their minds in the shower while giving their inaugurals. I think they must be extraordinary speeches that these people are giving to themselves. I mean, look, I think Howard Schultz is a good example of someone who was practicing running for president in his mind for a very, very long time.
That's a whole
and only discovered how hard it was when he started saying words out loud to other human beings.
That's a whole other garbage can of coffee grinds.
Howard Schultz, who got his candidacy unraveled in one interview with Ali Velshi, thinks that he belongs on the world stage. What a clown.
Well, Ali Velshi wasn't who was interviewing him in the shower.
But yeah, I mean, but everyone should run, and we'll see what happens.
Disclaimer.
We have no
Disclaimer.
And honestly, like, I have no fucking idea what's going to happen in this primary. I don't know about you guys, but like every single day.
I got it locked. I'm pretty square
Every
on
single day I read the news, I'm like, nothing would surprise me in this primary.
Some say chaos is a pit. I think chaos is a ladder, John.
When we come back, Tommy's interview with Nobel Peace Prize nominee Amanda Wen. Chaos.